and welcome to the 5th edition of the Mayborn Mentor event happening this spring. We're so excited to have you. I'm going to hand it off to Teresa and she'll run the program from here on out. But if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we would love to engage our students in future conversation. Go ahead, Teresa.
Hi, thank you. And welcome to this. I think this is probably the 4th of these mentoring activities that we've had with the students here at North Texas in the Mayborn School. I'm Teresa Kushner. I am the co-chair of the Education Committee and really passionate about introducing students to professionals in the industry. And today we have two that we're so excited to introduce to you. We have Ben Baby from ESPN and Aria Bell from AT&T. And what we're going to do is talk to them a little bit about bias. But before we get started, I have a really important question to ask each of them. And I'd like for them to introduce themselves with this question. What was your favorite memory of being at the Mayborn School of Journalism? So Aria, we'll let you start.
Okay. I think it was like being a Mayborn ambassador. I had the opportunity to be on the front lines and kind of engage with high school seniors that would come visit UNT. So I think that was pretty fun, just meeting people just beginning their journeys and finding out what they like to do, what they're interested in, and seeing if UNT was a fit, just because they were only a few years younger than I was. So it was fun to talk to the high school students. And then sometimes later on, see them as a freshman on campus. So that was one of my good times.
Right. Tell us a little bit, Aria, about what you do. You said you worked at AT&T. Tell us a little bit about your job.
Yes, I'm a lead PR and communications manager at AT&T, leading all things consumer 5G, which is a pretty hot topic right now in the tech world. So all of the new features, activations, or 5G products, my team, they lead that on the consumer front. So the new devices that you have that come out, the accessories, the offers that you have, just we had some really cool activations going on and still continuing during March Madness and the NCAA tournament. So just how we've navigated that through the pandemic and changing our experience to more virtual experience, just out of the safety of the employees at the NCAA, the players, and just the fans, everybody involved. So it's been quite a time to be at AT&T during a pandemic and just being on the front line of communications. So that's what I currently do right now. And I've been there for almost 3.5 years.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you. Well, Ben, what was your favorite memory and what are you engaged in today?
Yeah, I think probably one of the most foundational experiences for me was being a part of the North Texas Daily. I remember when I was on staff there, we still have the physical paper that came out 4 times a week. And, every day our advisor, Kathy Hennon at the time, would go through and just mark up every story with a red pen. And, when I first started out and even when I left, there was a whole lot of red on all of my stories. And so what I would do, I'd go into the daily office, I'd take the paper and then I'd just walk over into her office and say, hey, Kathy, can you walk me through kind of what I didn't do well, what went wrong, and kind of what you liked. And she was always brutally honest with me, which I always appreciated. And, I think that kind of set the foundation. And honestly, I love my time at the Mayborn. A lot of the skills I use there, or I still use today, especially in some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about later on this afternoon. And currently I work for ESPN. I cover the Cincinnati Bengals and the boxing and a little NFL stuff for us. I've been here since 2019. And prior to that, I was at the Dallas Morning News, the San Antonio Express News, and then I started out my career at the Denton Record Chronicle, covering high school sports.
Fantastic. Well, the topic today is bias, and we want to sort of explore that from a journalist perspective, because we were talking earlier before we actually came into the event about the fact that we're all trained as journalists to be as fair as possible to both sides of the situation. So tell me what each of your organizations are doing today to maintain the, to not be biased, to be professional in reporting, or to actually, in your case, Aria, how are you bringing people together inside AT&T? So who wants to take that first one?
Ari, you can go ahead.
Aria, you're on mute. We'll let you go ahead, Ben, while Aria figures that out.
Yeah, I think it's it's an interesting topic that we're bringing up because I think it's a really important topic as well, especially when we look at the level of discourse that we have in the country today, not just in sports, in what I cover in politics as well, and the topic of bias and how it's perceived. And there's all sorts of different types of bias. There's complicit bias, there's inherent bias, there's bias that we're not aware of. I think these are all topics that have been discussed ad nauseum over the last 12 months. Specifically since last summer as well, where we had a conversation about what bias looks like and how, what we may not think is bias actually may be, some, under beneath the surface, it may exist whether we know it or not. And so, I think that when any good newsroom that I've been in has always strived to make sure that bias is limited. I think good, and I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit. I think journalists know that bias is it's always going to be there. I think it's impossible to say you're trying to be unbiased. I think that's almost by human nature, we're going to tend to be biased one way or another, even when it comes to sourcing, when it comes to the way we structure our stories, when it comes to how we go about things. I think there's always going to be a level of bias present. I think it's our job as reporters, and then those who edit our stories and go into publication, is to limit the amount of bias as much as possible. I think that's the important thing when you look at it. And so, you're talking about the editing structure, the types, when you're talking about different types of stories, who sees the stories, whether, you need to have, if you're working on a story, do we have a person of color who needs to see the story before it goes out? Do we need to have a woman who sees the story, or somebody who in the LGBTQ community, depending on what the topic is? You need to make sure that, you have the proper, I think that's where hiring practices is important, making sure that you have the right resources internally to be able to see some things, because the last thing you want is for your content or readers to believe that what they're reading is biased content. I think that undermines the foundation of what you do as a whole. And there's different types of stories as well. And so when we're talking about bias, we're talking about straight news. Obviously when people do columns and things of that nature, that there's obviously going to be an opinion in there, and you want there to be the strong opinion supported by a lot of facts and reporting when they're in that as well. So I think it looks a little bit differently, but I think in any good newsroom, you want to make sure that the being cognizant of bias and how to limit it, and making sure that you can be as neutral as possible when you're presenting information, I think is always paramount.
Good point. Aria, did you get yourself unmuted? There we go.
Yes. So I would say, just from a consumer standpoint, we're looking at more so sensitivity on, for example, when the pandemic came out, like we have a lot of products, like even though the pandemic happened, we still are going to put out devices and new items for customers to buy. So it was more so just making sure that we're not seeming pushy or insensitive to what's going on. There are people, who have lost their jobs, have been laid off. Their money is tight. They're not looking to spend as much. So even being sensitive on the offers front, like what we're thinking about consumers first. Okay, people are at home now. Hotspots are a big deal. Okay, so let's see what we can do to, maybe have a great offer for our customers and the new existing customers as well. We had to think about, normally our offers are geared towards new customers. Well, there we have loyal customers that have been at AT&T ride or die since we were Southwestern Bell, just since the beginning. And so it's like, okay, we need to also navigate that and put out offers where they're just not for our new customers, but to show our loyal customers, hey, we're thinking about you. You're on our mind, and we're putting the customer first. So basically, that we're more customer-centric focus. And I think that's something AT&T has always been about, but the pandemic definitely, that was something we weren't prepared for. I don't think anybody was prepared to navigate that. I know I haven't lived through a pandemic. I think the last one was in the 1920s. So, that was something new on the communications front. While a lot of my just friends or family were at home having time off, I felt like I worked 2 times harder, just pushing out content, creating things. Okay, we now have to put a COVID-19 messaging center on our website so customers have a place to go. So what's going on for customers that really can't pay the bills in the next few months? Are there any offers? What's happening? Will my TV get cut off? Like, is there anybody out in the field that can help? What are the stores looking like if we can't physically go to stores? That was a really big deal for us. A lot of we touch our customers in our store locations. So with stores being closed, navigating, okay, what does that look like if a customer can't come into the store, but we're trying to give them that same experience as if they were in the store, able to walk around, see the devices, test out the devices, and see what accessories they do like and they don't like. So I think we already had a program in place that I worked on. For example, of AT&T Ready to Go, where you can actually order your device online and it can come to you. We'll have an expert come to your door. They would usually come in the home, walk you through the setup of your device, answer any questions that you may have, a real white glove approach to someone receiving their device, if they don't want to come in store and they want to skip the wait. Well, now we offer where someone, if you feel comfortable, they can come in your home, or they can show you outside of the home at 6 feet distance, or they can talk you through it through the phone. And there's some virtual videos as well that show you the how to set up. I know that was a lot at one time, but just looking for from the consumer standpoint, just making sure they're always in our mind and they come first, and we're looking at our products and our offers and what we're giving them, from like if I was a customer, how would this appeal to me? And just making sure we're having inclusion just in our office space. I'm proud to say that we have definitely made sure we're hiring really outside, not just within. We've hired people too, with this now things being virtual, from Detroit. We've hired different people from just Colorado outside of our organization, really not just talking about we want to bring different minorities within the company. I'm actually seeing it. And so it's great not to just hear about it, but now my team calls seeing those new faces come within our company and really offer great value and some outside perspective to where we can push out better content for our customers, internally and externally. So I'm just happy to be a part of a company that is not just saying it, but they're also doing it, and that we're having those internal conversations. Our CCO, we just had a Q&A session, and we always have Q&A sessions to keep things transparent. And we had one Q&A session that was specifically about George Floyd, and the different riots and different things that took place, and the fact that he stopped and took the time out to talk about it, and he is the head. It made it a very awesome and dynamic conversation that I've never experienced within the workplace, that we moved off of work topics and just talked about how we're feeling as humans during this time right now. Just hearing our employees and their different perspectives, and just creating a very open environment, like emotionally at home, dealing with things personally. It was very stressful, feeling like you're seeing someone on the television that could be your family member, your friend, and to have in the workspace where we could kind of take off that work mask that we put on every day, being professional, bringing our best selves, keeping a smile on your face even when things are happening, that we could kind of show a little bit of that vulnerability. That for me was like, I'm really proud to work here, like a company that took the time out to just have that discussion and not just put out a statement for the public.
So thank you, Aria.
Sorry, I talk a lot. So.
That's okay. Ben, what about ESPN? What are sort of the things that are running around in your organization now? Is there any kinds of programs for bias or dealing with that?
I think it depends on what you're talking about in terms of when you look at it from the production standpoint of how we go about things, I think that's a day-to-day conversation that you constantly have, and you want to make sure that you're in tune with your editors, with those who are in charge of you in the workflow. I think that's something that you inherently do. I think it's a daily conversation almost, whether you have it or not. You kind of are always kind of aware of that, because everything you produce kind of has that, with that mindset of, okay, this is a fundamental thing. I mean, operating without bias, I think, as a reporter should be a day one thing that you learn at a place like North Texas, and then you go through, when you're going through the business, it's something that is ingrained in you. So honestly, if you're at ESPN and we're having to talk about how to retrain bias, I think there's some other issues that need to be discussed, because when you're at this level, to be quite honest, this is something you should already have nailed down. I think what Aria, touched on, in terms of conversations within the workplace, that is something that, we've been cognizant of, especially during the pandemic and the death of George Floyd, and now recently what's going on in the Asian American community. We've been having conversations. There have been, workshops. There's been ways for the company to engage with its employees. It's going to have these kind of conversations. And while it may seem, non-consequential to people outside of the company, I think it is very important, especially in the media landscape. I think when you have these conversations internally, and when you're thinking about these things, it's always good. I remember actually one of my favorite classes at North Texas I took with Professor Neil Foote, who worked in Miami, very well-respected professor. And, I took his race, gender, and the media course in the summer. And it just so happened that it was around the time that Trayvon Martin was killed. And we had a very frank discussion over that, topic and that situation. And it was taking Neil's class kind of taught me to say, okay, there's a reason that's in the curriculum at North Texas. It's that when you're going through these things as newsmakers, these are things that you need to think about and have internal conversations with, not just, with yourself, but also with those in your newsroom and those around you, your colleagues. And these things make a big difference on the product that you produce, and ultimately has a big impact on your community. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to make our community a better place. I think that's a fundamental tenet of journalism. So being able to have these conversations, about, real life topics that may not necessarily be about your current work, but ultimately when you're having these discussions that Ari and I are talking about, it does make a broader impact, and it does improve the product for the public. And I think that is paramount. And this is a very important topic when you're talking about bias. And I think that plays a big role in how we go about our daily lives, whether we know it or not.
Yesterday on Sunday morning, there was a discussion about how we consume things from people within our society that are racist or have different attitudes. And one of them was about art, that people who create art, do you really think you should give the time and space to those people if they've committed sexual abuse or sexual harassment, or if they have spouted off about something when it comes to race? So what's your opinion about how you represent those people? Because in a way, that's a different kind of bias.
Let's see, Ari, do you want to go or do you want me to go? It's either way. Teresa, do you have a preference?
I don't care, guys.
I was gonna say, I think this one might better suit Ben than I, but
Yeah, I'll go ahead and handle it. Yeah, it's not an issue. I think it comes to, so we're having a conversation in sports right now about Deshaun Watson, the Texans quarterback, who's had multiple sexual assault and harassment, lawsuits pending against him. And so, you have to have a conversation of, and this is actually pretty common in sports. Unfortunately, it's sad that, it's kind of old song and dance on, because you do athletes, this is shouldn't be unfamiliar territory for anybody who's covered sports for any amount of time. And that, honestly, from the high school level up to the college level and to the pro level, I've seen situations like this, unfortunately, across the board. And, I think you have to, sorry, my hotel, I'm actually at a hotel out in Hopkinsville. I don't know why it's ringing. So apologize about that. We're just going to let that ring for a second. So I think that one of the issues with this is that, hold on, let me go ahead and mute this phone here. I apologize.
Don't worry about it.
Oh, there it is. All right, it's done. So my apologies here. So I think that when you look at the reporting for Deshaun Watson and kind of how it's been played out, when we're talking about, how do we consume art and whatever, and sports is art in a way, obviously there's going to be a conversation about, what happens in his place in the league. And it's always been varied in terms of, should we allow these people to play sports again, or should we allow them to consume whatever it is, whether it's art, music, and that is ultimately up to the markets to decide. And if there is not a if there's not a place for them in the market space, I think it's good that we've kind of seen that trend over the years where there has been, the public has been less willing to kind of consume things from people who have been bad actors. And I think that's probably necessary. And there's probably a different conversation for another day. But in terms of when it comes to reporting, you have to report basically everything that's involved. And so we have a reporter, Sarah Barshop, who's done a tremendous job covering the situation in Houston. And, you have to make sure that you're balancing things like you would any court case. And you want to make sure that there is a balance, and it's kind of hard to talk about. Honestly, it'd be easier for me to write about it than talk about it. But you want to make sure that you are balancing things to an extent. You want to make sure that you're not, putting, basically being PR for one side or the other, but you want to make sure that you let the facts dictate your reporting. And more often than not, just like you see in court cases, when the evidence is overmounting, you do not need to be heavy-handed with what is going on. Usually, the evidence makes it very clear as to what the verdict and what the outcome should be. And if you're reporting things in a proper way, you could have, even if you present one side of it, if you've done the reporting and everything is accurately done, at the end of it, the conclusion should be very clear. And that's not a situation of bias. That is a situation of trying to discover what's the truth of the matter, and you go from there. So, I think those are two separate things, Teresa, when you're talking about, bias and from a consumer standpoint, but then from a production standpoint, it's a very difficult thing to balance. But I think as professionals, it is something that we need to do very well because it is important as to how we tell these stories, how we frame these stories. And that's honestly one of the biggest aspects about being a journalist, is that you have to, how you do that, affects a lot of different ways. There's a big ripple effect. So it's important for us to do that job well at a fundamental level.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Aria?
I would just say from a corporate standpoint, the most that would affect us would be our partners and who we collaborate with on different activations, initiatives, who's out in the field representing us. We do work with a lot of influencers. So we would definitely want to make sure for us we're keeping up with the news and the content that is being put out, and making sure we're aware of what's going on, because we want to make sure who we collaborate with and the companies that we partner with, they're an extension of what we believe in and our pillars of what we stand on. And so from a corporate standpoint, that would be the most important thing from us. Like anytime if there's a partner that or an influencer that might get in some hot water, we have to then also put out a statement and talk within our team, especially our team that deals with crisis communications. Like, hey, okay, do we have a reactive statement for this that's going on? We see that this has already been out published in a couple of top media outlets. They might come to us asking a question about our stance on it. So let's have something prepared already in that case. And, we'll talk to it within the team, shoot it up to executives, APPs, get legal approval. Everything that we do has to go through legal. And I think working within smaller organizations, I didn't realize that as much. But once I worked within AT&T, which is over 100,000 employees, making sure, okay, not only are we coming up with this content and we're putting it out, but we're also having that legal perspective to make sure, okay, from every angle, we're good, we're approved, and we're not offending anybody, any partner, everything just from our contracts that we also have. So
That's very interesting, because I just read a statistic this last week that 47% of consumers want the brands that they purchase to support some sort of social justice or some sort of social program, which
yeah.
means that they vote with their dollars as they buy those brands that do stand for something. And the statistics said that it's even important that you have a purpose and you stand for something, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, you just take a stand. So
Yeah.
it's sort of interesting that you would say that about AT&T. Does AT&T take a stand?
Yeah, we do. And I will say and that's internally and externally. So not only do we support externally, like, and speak out, and I know we had a campaign social media wise where we had just our people of color within the company speak out and talk and just show our support through that. Internally, they've sent just different messages to us as well. We've had very open conversations on our internal chat boards. And then also just, I'm sure there's some within ESPN where we have different organizations for our African Americans, our veterans, our LGBT community, our Asian Americans. Just there's a community for everybody, making sure like even within our organization there is a smaller community outside of your coworkers that you feel comfortable with and at home with. So
Mhm.
yeah, they definitely make it open that we support
Yeah.
and
So
stand for.
that's good. So Ben, does ESPN have any sort of things, any stance that they take against or for something that's in the social justice area?
You know, I know that we have different platforms that make sure that we're accounting for certain things. We have ESPNW, we have the Undefeated, and there's obviously other people more so at my company who can probably are better suited to speak on that subject. To be quite honest with you, but I think that from a consumer standpoint and from the limited knowledge that I have, I think that we've done a good job of trying to tell stories that may go underrepresented. We've done a good job in recent years, even before I got there, of establishing verticals and more so supporting those verticals as well, such as ESPNW and the Undefeated. Like it's easy to establish something and say, oh, we have it. But then it ends up being lip service if there's no substantial content behind it, because consumers and readers, they're not dumb. They understand if there is substance behind what you're doing, and if you really are backing your words with actions. And I think the fact that we have a lot of great content on ESPNW, we have a lot of great content on the Undefeated. We've done a tremendous job with our hiring practices, and you have diverse voices and opinions, and especially as things come up time and time again, we have. And if you're hiring the right way, you are prepared when these moments occur. You're not scrambling and looking around going, okay, we need someone to write about this topic. And then because you haven't hired well, you don't have anybody, you're ill prepared for that moment. And so if you're doing the right things when you're in your hiring practices, you're not caught off guard, and you are making sure that you're accounting for things on a regular basis. And hopefully if you have a really good workplace culture, these are things that other people are aware of as well. So it's something you're not caught off guard when we're talking about systemic racism or involving sexual assault, sexual harassment. You're having these conversations, and these are things that are talked about. And so I think when you look at what ESPN's done, it's actually been fascinating. I think that, in some of our programming and messaging, we want to make sure that we're staying neutral in certain ways, but at the same time, we want to make sure we're giving the right outlets in the right spaces on our site to engage and talk about certain things in the right way. And, I think that there is in various newsrooms that I've been in, there are certain things that like you tweet about, you don't tweet about. And I think that when you're talking about bias, the way that we put out so much more content than we ever have before, even though it may not look like it, everything you tweet is content, everything you post on social media in general is content, and anything that you put out, even if it's not your, official bylined work, like just because I put out something on ESPN.com doesn't mean that, if I am very biased with the content that I put out on my Twitter account, the readers are going to realize that as well. And so I think it's important that to remain unbiased. And I don't know, this may be a deviation from your question, to be quite honest, but I think that that's part of it as well. And I think that is something that is top of mind. So you want to make sure that you are, giving, when you're talking about certain subjects, you want to make sure you're doing it in the proper spaces, because if not, it does make things kind of difficult and murky, in terms of how you're delivering content. this is a whole, like, we can talk for hours about this subject, because I think that there's a lot of things that have changed over the last 20 years, specifically, maybe even the last 5 or 10 about this. And, it is important. And, I've always felt that ESPN has done a very good job with these things. And frankly, if I didn't, I wouldn't be working here.
Good,
Yeah,
very good.
I did want to, and I wanted to piggyback off of when Ben said not being caught off guard, and if you're hiring correctly,
Mhm.
that's a uh, big deal to me. And I'm glad that it is also something that AT&T is starting to navigate and shift within, because hiring that outside, that talent, that new talent, and bringing in people with from different backgrounds purposefully, like, and very intentionally, it does change the dynamic of the culture. And I feel like that's where you can have some, that's where bias can be good, and then that's where also bias can be bad. So I feel like we all are biased just in general, like most of the time unintentionally biased just through how we grew up. And so I feel like you can use your bias for good or you can use it for bad. And in the hiring space is definitely a space where your bias could be a good thing, in making, being intentional about who you're hiring, who you're onboarding, just to bring a different perspective in, because I feel like different perspectives definitely make companies more successful, and it's been proven as well. So
So one of the things that I always hear, and this is for both of you guys from your corporate backgrounds and hiring people, but one of the things I always hear is that, well, we can't find candidates of color or diversity of any kind. We just can't find them. What do you say internally to people who can't find candidates for you that would aid your diversity?
I'll take a go at this. I would say they're not seeking out and not really using the resources that they have. There are people of color, and not just African Americans, but from all backgrounds that are out there, and that if you do ask, I know they're intentionally reaching out to our local schools. Specifically, they're reaching out to HBCUs, and getting their contact information, seeing if they can share job postings, internships with their students. So asking us, hey guys, if you have any people that you think, a friend or so that you would be a reference for, let us know. We would like to talk to them. So I think it's just all about intentionally seeking out that talent. And if you don't know where to go, talk to somebody within your company or a colleague or a partner, somebody you know, and ask, do they know somebody? To me, it's all about actually seeking out that talent.
Great, that's great.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think that it does take a lot of search, and you have to really want to try to look at it to kind of figure this out. I will say though that this has been something that has been discussed. I've talked to within the industry, that you are seeing companies who are probably more cognizant of wanting to diversify their hiring practices, and then they're finding that at certain levels they're not finding qualified individuals. And I don't think that there is something to be said for that, because that sometimes does occur. And the issue is because the hiring practices at the lower levels are
Mm,
not good.
mm,
And that is the issue, is that when you go to, smaller newspapers for a while, those things may not be, in smaller companies, those things may not be top of mind. And so there becomes this trickle up effect, to where if that mentality is not fostered at lower levels, then you're not developing people's skill sets at a younger age, and they're not ready for certain jobs when they get to a certain level. So let's say, a mid-level newspaper wants to hire, they've made it a point, say, we want to make sure we have a very diverse background of candidates. And ultimately, I think in the news business, I think you're judged on what your content is what you are. Like, it's not easy to see if somebody's good or bad. And eventually you do have to be able to carry the skill set as well. Because like I said, readers are dumb, and they understand, there's a certain level of quality that's expected. And I think in journalism, I think it's on all aspects from the top of the funnel all the way to the bottom, to make sure that they are thinking about this, because it does make a big impact on the industry as a whole when those at the bottom of the industry are not prioritizing this and saying, we want to make sure that we have diversity in our newsroom at a young age. Like, we're talking about people who just graduated college. They should, you need to be making sure that you're looking for a diverse skill set, because what that does is that trains them, and then moving forward, they're going to be more qualified for other jobs as they get older and they move up. I mean, I think that is something, and because there is a danger, and this is not just a race thing or a qualification thing. I think there is a danger when you put somebody in a position they're not ready to take, and that creates a lot of pressure. You have there's the complex, the imposter syndrome that occurs. When someone feels like they're not ready for a certain job, and then they maybe kind of crater to the pressure. And there's a lot of pressure, especially in media today, because people can basically tell you whatever they want on Twitter, and if you're not ready for that kind of criticism and feedback, and people saying, yeah, we don't think you're very good, and yada yada yada. I mean, I get that on a daily basis. There's plenty of people who think I'm terrible at my job, so which is fair. Sometimes they're probably correct, and so I think that you got to make sure that there is you're kind of nurturing on many levels. You're nurturing younger writers, younger professionals, so they're ready for these kind of jobs. So I think that there is two aspects to this. I do think that, yes, I think you need to make sure that you can't just say, oh, we don't see any qualified candidates, and use that as a cop-out, because sometimes that may mean you're not just looking hard enough. So you do need to exhaust every vehicle available and make sure that you are plugged in, you're able to broaden your connections. And this goes to, when you're at the top of newsrooms, you need to make sure that your circle is not just people who look like you. You need to make sure that your circle, even if they're not hiring them, you need to have a diverse network. And if you have a diverse network, you can call and say, hey, I'm looking for somebody who fits X, Y, and Z, kind of has this skill set, this kind of range that we're looking to add to our company. And if you're, as an executive, if your network is broad, you're not going to have that issue. But I do think that at the lower levels that there does need to be a better job of making sure that they are having this mindset, because you need to make sure that is nurtured, so that when executives at higher levels are looking for diverse candidates, there are plenty of them to choose from. And so I think that it has a big impact on the industry, and it's something that does need to be that it's kind of a multi-sided coin, and there are a lot of layers to that conversation, but it's something that does need to be addressed actively and not passively.
So here's a question for you from George Foster, who is on our board. It's a great question. Today, they've seated the jury for Derek Chauvin. If you were reporting on Derek Chauvin and this trial, could you remain unbiased?
As a reporter, I think you would have to. If you can't, then you shouldn't be reporting it, because it's what we get paid to do. They give us money to do our job professionally. We can do it for free and not do a professional job. And so, I think it's part of the standards and ethics of being a journalist, is making sure that you deliver the news unbiasedly as much as possible. And here's the reason why it's important, is because if there is a hint of bias in what you're doing, ultimately, if you're reporting the truth, some people may believe that, oh, there's a slant to that. There's an agenda behind the reporting. And if you're doing your job well, and whatever the verdict is, if that is the outcome of the verdict, you need to make sure that, I think it has the biggest impact, and your reporting has the biggest impact when readers believe that there is no agenda behind it. And when they feel like they're getting the purest information possible, that there is no slant. And like I said, at the end of this trial, and whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter what the trial is. Ultimately, you have to, if the evidence points to everything and you've done the reporting the way it needs to be done, it's going to be very clear. I mean, there's a reason that even in open and shut cases, there is a defense attorney, even when you can say 100% of the evidence points to someone being guilty. But even that's the case, the way the judicial system is set up, there's a defense attorney can still go up there and argue whatever they want. They get a chance to account for their side. But ultimately, the jury may come back in 30 minutes and go, yeah, we think this is a pretty open and shut case. This is the verdict, and that's that. I think journalism is a lot very much like what you see in a courtroom to some degree. I think you give the opportunity to give the other side their piece or whatever space you want your story. And that's a conversation you need to have as well. And it needs to be an appropriate amount. I think that's a very important aspect of it too. It doesn't need to be disproportionate to what is actually going on. I think you need to represent the situation accordingly. And this is where somebody who was in news, like sometimes, I'm just a sports reporter over here. So sometimes this may be a little bit out of my wheelhouse. They like to joke that we're in the toy department here, which is, sometimes, to be fair, that can be true. But I think that when you're reporting a case, if you're doing your job correctly, it shouldn't be difficult to report the truth of the matter it to come across as unbiased as possible. And I think making sure that you're aware of that is important.
How about you, Aria?
No, I definitely agree with Ben. Although like we write more to our consumer and our products, when I do write on the side, just like for the Dallas Observer, a local paper, every even just in my interviews and when I write, listening to the interview back, just making sure I'm telling the honest story, not favoriting anybody. Like he said, I just feel like UNT and just if you're in journalism, that is something that is instilled. So sometimes I'm like, when I do see biased journalism, I'm like, wow, like we all know. Like it amazes me because like we all know it's not supposed to be biased. You're supposed to have an ethical background. You know, your morale is supposed to still be there. And like he said, just reporting the facts, just making sure, even being honest with quotes. Do not put out a false quote or something that is just not true, that can cause a stir or just for buzz. Just being honest with the reporting that you're doing. So I mean, and that's just me interviewing like music artists or even just doing reporting and giving honest feedback of a show. That might be small news, but if I really go to a concert and I see it, I have to give honest feedback. I can't be biased just because I might even like the artist. If the show was not great, if the performance was not great, and even though it breaks my heart to say it, that's the story that I do have to put out, that they lacked here at this stop in Dallas. So, you know, just keeping it honest across the board. Like he said, not in news, and I'm even not in sports reporting, but just in general, always keeping it honest. Even with our products that we push out, we cannot lie on our competitors or put out fake percentages and say we're this far ahead of T-Mobile and Verizon. They're trying to catch up. We have the fastest in the nation, and none of this is true. Like, so, you know, just making sure we are telling facts about our products and our consumers are getting the honest truth.
How do you how do you make sure that your facts are aligned and that you have your facts right? Because, you know, nowadays facts can be made up, you know, they can just be, you can be lied to, you know, it doesn't matter. So how do you make sure?
I know
Yeah.
for our speed test and different things, we definitely go through like the GWS, I think national, it's like a national testing center where they test all Verizon, T-Mobile. So like we know for a
Ah,
fact that our we do have the nation's like best network or fastest 5G. So we do run tests. I even run tests physically before we send out our 5G devices. Like I would be down there even during the pandemic in the new Discovery District downtown with our devices testing for the 5G network. They say we can get it. I'm walking around looking silly, but I'm getting the speeds. Okay, great. We have the right speeds before we send these devices off. So I know from the tech standpoint, we are testing everything thoroughly time and time again. And we usually do test against our competitors. And that's when we know who this year might have the fastest network or the fastest 5G. So
okay.
Yeah,
So,
Teresa, to kind of piggyback on kind of the previous question and combine it into this one, I think it's interesting. I think it's a very dangerous space that we've entered into. The fact that facts can be fungible and can be made up, and a lot of people just don't care whether they're true or not. And it's interesting. We have this is an aside here, but very quickly, I think we're getting to a point in media consumption where people may necessarily want biased information, and that's not good. I don't think it benefits anybody to get biased information, but unfortunately, people sometimes pick their outlets based on if they have a bias, because you know, people sometimes just like to be reaffirmed. They don't like to be informed, and unfortunately, that's something we have no control over that. And if that's what the American marketplace decides, I mean, we're essentially a capitalist country, and you know, they can, if the general public says, you know, that's what we want, then I guess, you know, we're fighting an uphill battle. We're a bunch of Don Quixotes out here trying to battle windmills, and so. You know, I think for us is even if that may be the case and it is disheartening, it's still our job to try to be as unbiased as possible and stick to that principle. And I always argue that if I used to cover Texas A&M, and A&M fans and college football fans in Texas are very passionate. And I knew a story was probably perfect when I had a bunch of Texas fans mad at me and a bunch of A&M fans mad at me. accusing that I was being a shill for the other side. I said, that's perfect. That's ideally what you want, is basically, if everyone on both sides are mad at you, you're probably doing a perfect job. But, making sure that your facts are accurate, I think it goes down to being a diligent reporter as well. So, for example, there's a boxer named Adrian Broner who's had a bevy of legal problems. And, he had a fight recently a couple of weeks ago in his the Showtime, the TV sponsor for the fight that was presenting the fight. They said, hey, do you want to do a one-on-one with Adrian? I said, sure, it's great. And I asked Adrian, what's going on? Why are you coming back? Haven't fought in a couple of years. And, he said, oh, I just fell in love with boxing, and gave me all these cliche answers. And it would have been easy for me to say, okay, this is the story that they want to write. Obviously, that's the agenda that they have to go out and want to write the story. Well, doing a little bit of digging, and of course, it's been widely reported, Adrian Broner was, I believe, convicted of a misdemeanor sexual assault for something in a Cleveland nightclub a few years ago. And as a result, I think he got the charges lowered, but there was a legal settlement against him, a civil suit of $800,000. And he's had a little bit of trouble paying that money over time. And so as much as Adrian may love boxing, the reality of it is that he needed the money to pay the civil suit. And I went through the court records in the county that I still can't pronounce that is in Cleveland. And they basically laid out what the facts really are, because it was in court. And I was able to say to the dollar amount, this is what he owed on this day and everything else. And, after the story ran, it was interesting. His lawyer got a hold of me and said, hey, just want to make sure, we actually are contesting some of this, and I just wanted to make sure that that was represented. I said, sure, because I knew it wasn't in the legal documents. I said, go ahead and send me can you point me to where the filing is? And I'll be sure to account for that once it's in there. I still haven't heard from him. So I think the thing is that you can, it's easy if you're lazy to present a bad set of facts or not do a thorough job. But if you're diligent in what you're doing, you need to make sure that you're probably going to get as close to the middle as possible. Like I said, I think that's journalism 101. I think if you just take one side and run with it, inherently that's going to become bias. And I think a conversation of bias and sourcing, which we didn't even touch on, I think is a big aspect of this as well, is that you need to make sure that you're digging in and getting as close to the middle as possible. And if you talk to enough people, eventually you're going to find the truth is always, like the saying goes, somewhere in the middle. And that's going to be, I think that's going to be very paramount. So I think you have to be diligent for everything we've talked on. I think being diligent and being studious in what you're doing pays dividends.
That's fantastic. That's a really good example. So we're going to open this up to the team today. Are there any other questions from the people on the call that you'd like to ask these two wonderful panelists that we have? Anybody have a question?
Honestly, I feel like you asked a lot of good questions. I just took a mass media and ethics class last semester. And so like a lot of the things that y'all were talking about, that the panelists were discussing was just some of the things that we just talked about in class. So it was just nice to hear, to see that the things that I'm learning, in my Mayborn degree, to see that, other people are in actual like jobs and in that. And I'm sorry, I didn't get to introduce myself. My name is Kenesha Hewitt. I'm a broadcast journalist. I'm a senior at UNT. But yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation so far. And like, I know in times like this with Derek, with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, it is so hard being a reporter. And I attended like a Mayborn mentor event last semester with an NBC reporter. And I asked her, and she was a Black woman. And I asked her, like, in times like this, like, how do you eliminate bias? Like, how hard is it being a Black woman reporter in times of, like, our brother is slain out on the street? Like, how do you give out information like that? How hard is it? And she just told me, like, she had a lot of her colleagues take the year off or like kind of quit journalism for a little bit because it was just too hard to eliminate bias, being that this is who we are. So like, I guess a question that I would ask then, given that both of our panelists are minorities, how will you, if you was presented with the opportunity to be, a spokesperson for your community, because, being that we are on TV and our community do expect us to speak on certain issues. So like, how would you do that especially given that both of you are part of like corporations that like whatever you say, it kind of falls back on the corporation. So like, how do you like border that line between like still trying to be true to who you are and true to your community, but also still, you know, with your job?
I would say for me, it's just being true to who you are, simply what you said. Like, I know previously sometimes I feel like I would put a filter on in the workplace, and then, when I would get off, I would be relieved. I'm back to 100% Aria. And then I just got to a certain point where I was like, this doesn't do me any justice. It's actually taking more of a toll on me to kind of have this this face during the day at work, trying to be so professional, on point, and cancel out what stereotypes I think people perceive of my community. And just, I was like, I'm just going to be myself. And me being myself, like, that hasn't changed any dynamic from me having my work face on. And I just think when you are given the opportunity and the space to speak up, take that time to do it. Of course, gracefully, and more in a sense of, I'm educating, not I'm telling you, because you want the person on the receiving end to be able to receive it, even if they might have a difference of opinion. It just opens up a dialogue for welcome conversation. So, like when my CCO, when he set it up to an open floor, there were two people before me that spoke, and seeing them speak, they probably don't know this, but it gave me the courage to speak up and share a little bit of my truth, and how the George Floyd at the time, because that's what we were talking about, how that situation was actually taking a toll on me. Not little did they know, I actually woke up that morning and cried. Just out of personal frustration, waking up to the news, seeing it again. I actually was like, I can't get on Instagram anymore because I'm tired of each day I'm seeing something new that is just like saddening. So little did they know, I cried that morning, and my team, my immediate team, my director and my two colleagues I work with on the close basis, we actually had a talk, because it was one of those things where I couldn't fake it anymore. We always started off the calls with, how are you? How's your day going? How's your morning? And everybody's, oh, great, just another Monday, just another day. And for the first time, I was like, you know what? I feel really heavy today, guys. I just feel heavy. So I just think being your true self and bringing that authentic part of you, that you feel comfortable with, nothing forced, obviously. It'll inspire others, and it'll give you a strength and a little confidence that you didn't know that you had. I never planned on even speaking during that Q&A call, but like I said, other people speaking up and being comfortable helped me be comfortable to say something, and then I felt good, and I actually felt it was a little therapeutic. So I'm not saying bring all your emotions and pour them out on the table, but if there is ever an opportunity where you can say something, take that moment and take it gracefully. Yeah.
That's great. So Ben?
Yeah, to touch on this a little bit, I know we got to run out of time here, but first off, I very rarely am in my reporting on things that touch me personally, because of just my nature. I'm Indian, and there aren't hardly any Indians that play sports. Usually not towing that line. Just to be black, I mean, just to be frank here, it's just kind of the case. I can't imagine the strength and the perseverance, and I have so much respect for everyone who is black, who had to report during the George Floyd, just the death, and then all the aftermath. It just takes a lot of mental strength, a lot of toughness, and it's an extra reserve that is required of you. And for those people, I have no idea how they did it, and they have my utmost respect. And this goes for any topic that someone has to cover where they have a direct knowledge of. And I don't think people understand that it's not just draining on you, from a work standpoint, but personally, a lot of us take our work home with us, and it weighs on us all the time. And so you're just constantly surrounded by this trauma, and it's difficult then to go out and do your job. And so it is very difficult, and that's not something that should be understated. And I think workplaces have been very good, especially over the last 12 months, to say, if you need a break, let us know. And saying, you don't need to work yourself to the bone. If you feel like you need to take a step back, just for your mental health and your just to preserve some sanity, like, you should do that. And I think that one thing that we need to realize, there's a dirty little secret in journalism, is that we're all a little biased in the way that we show it is by the stories that we pick. And I think that there's a, I think that that's kind of a way that we go about kind of showing inherently what our bias is by the types of stories we tell. And there's two aspects of that. Number one, I think when you're telling stories, you want to be unbiased. But I think as a person of color, one of the things that you can do well is there's a lot of times stories that are underreported. And I think a way that you can serve your profession and your community well is making sure you're telling stories that aren't being told. Maybe people on the margins who felt like their voices aren't being heard, that their stories have been oppressed over the years. Being able to tell those stories, I think, is a honest and genuine way to do what we're called to do as journalists, and making sure that we're affecting, the conversation and telling stories that aren't necessarily being told. And that's something that uniquely that, because of our backgrounds, from whatever background that may be, we're able to tell that with a little bit better level of expertise, excuse me. And I think that's important as well. And so I think that there's a way professionally to go about it where it feels like, sometimes, it's hard to stay quiet and say unbiased about certain topics. And we really want to speak out about something, whether that's in politics or something that's going on socially or just culturally. But the way that we go about our jobs, and if we do our jobs at the highest level, I think does way more and has much bigger impact than any tweet that we can put out, anything we can put out on social media. When we're telling true and authentic stories from an unbiased perspective, when we're able to maybe shine a light on things that are being hidden, I think that's huge. And I think if that's a great way to go about it, and you're serving not only your community well and the people you represent, but you're serving the public really well. And if we want to have an impact on those around us, I think that's a great way to do it. And, I think we have a skill set that's unique. I think anybody can go out and kind of give an opinion on social media about what's going on in the world today. Like when I'm saying something, I want to make sure I'm adding something to the conversation. But what journalists are skilled in and what we specialize in are telling great stories that have an impact on other people. And not everyone has that skill set. And a place like North Texas, I think, does a great job of training us. So in times of crisis and times of moments that are touchy and it's kind of captivated the country, we're able to go out and tell these stories that can have a massive impact on people, more so than any tweet or thing that we can do. So I think if you're doing the job at the highest level, I think you can serve both. And I think that's kind of it's a great way to use our skill set. And I think it's a maximization of our abilities.
That's wonderful. Thank you both very much for your time today. You were great panelists. We really appreciate you being here. And I'm quite sure that the students at North Texas appreciated it as well. So Corinna, do you have anything else that we need to?
Nope, just many thanks to our panelists and our students. This will be recorded, so it'll go up on our social media and also our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to access this later and share it with all your best friends who also want to hear about this topic. And they will have one more Mayborn Mentor event coming up next week. It's about your friends in HR and all the inside scoop about getting the dream job. So I hope you join us again. Again, thank you to our panelists, thank you to our students, and thank you to Teresa.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Talk
Thank you
to you
for
later.
having us.
Bye.
Y'all.